All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call the Economically Disadvantaged and Highly Mobile Students Subcommittee to order, and Dominique will read the statement.
The Tennessee Department of Education is excited to work with you on this opportunity to discuss the state's formula for funding public education. Before we begin, the department would like to remind you of the following. Conversations on this topic are not intended to reflect on the current BEP funding formula. The current BEP funding formula will remain in place until a new funding formula is recommended to and approved by the Tennessee General Assembly. The public is encouraged to submit comments in writing to ensure that all communications are thoroughly documented and can be reviewed and considered in the future. Public comment is encouraged to focus on developing a new funding formula rather than revising the current funding formula. Consider what should be funded in a new funding formula and at what level. Subcommittees will be responsible for reviewing public comment and making recommendations for what should be included in a new funding formula. While all committees, subcommittees, and members of the public should feel free to communicate openly, documents and records may be subject to public inspection pursuant to the Tennessee Public Records Act and may be publicly posted or otherwise made available. All recommendations that are submitted by committees and subcommittees will be reviewed and considered, but not all recommendations will ultimately be in the proposed funding formula.
Thank you, Dominique. If you will go ahead and take the attendance.
So I have Senator Gilmore, Victor, Sherelle Campbell Street, Elisa Kim, Mary Graham, Jennifer Nichols, Samantha Wigand. There's somebody on the phone with a 731 number. Can you let me know who that is? Okay, great. Did I miss anyone?
No, I think that's everyone. All right. I hope everyone's doing well. This is meeting number 5 of 6. And a lot has happened since our last meeting in regards to this pathway to moving towards a student-based funding formula. Dominique, could you go to the slide? Just kind of doing the previewing. So today we want to spend some time looking at the framework that was proposed by the department. We also want to dive deeper into the recommendations that we've provided to the steering committee, as well as diving into some of the terms, the policy terms that will ultimately define how this formula shapes out. We'll get to that in a little bit. But before we get started, if you are not speaking, please mute yourself. Want to make sure everyone can hear everyone. And there's not a lot of feedback. So I think we can start off. I hope everyone has had a chance to look at the framework that the department has proposed. They proposed last Tuesday. Are there any initial thoughts for those of you who have had a chance to review this? Any immediate takeaways? And feel free to hop in.
Hey, this is Mary from United Way. I think there's a lot more questions as opposed to reactions to it, like around weight sizes and initial calculations, particularly for English language learners and students with disabilities. And we also had a lot of questions around inflation. Anyway, I've got a whole bunch of questions. I don't know that I have comments, but I have a whole bunch of questions. I don't know if that was helpful, sorry. I guess I should wait as we go through bit by bit.
No, thank you. That was great. Anyone else like to share out?
Yeah, I'm fine. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll share some of my initial takeaways. And I definitely think that this is on the right track. Just looking at it, very pleased to see that a lot of the hard work our subcommittee has put in to this process has been reflected in this initial framework proposal. Um, when we look at economically disadvantaged and highly mobile students, I think we've done a really good job thus far ensuring that the needs of those children are reflected in this framework. So, but as you all know, that this is kind of the beginning, and we're not quite there yet. And something that the commissioner mentioned is kind of a reminder that there's as you can see, no dollar amounts, but that will be decided through the governor, and then of course the legislature will legislate on what those dollar amounts are and go through the process. And so what starts out as $1 amount might change, and I think you all know that, but it's a good reminder for all of us. So, okay, Dominique, I think we can go back to the PowerPoint. So, are there any? So, like I said, we've done a good job of articulating what should be on in this formula, and that's a lot's reflected there. But not everything that we've mentioned is reflected there. Would love to hear some of your thoughts about some things that are not reflected in this framework that maybe we should continue to push on, or do we feel like everything here suffices to the needs and the duty that our committee has been charged with for the students that we're supposed to look out for? And Dominic, do you have that one pager that can show kind of the recommendations that we made?
Victor, may I ask the question, please?
Yes, ma'am. Go right ahead, Senator.
And we'd also talked about Black teachers, specifically Black male teachers. Is that included in any of your documents? It's so small I can't read it.
Dominic, could you read out some of those items listed there, please?
There you go. Okay, it's much better.
Yes, is that better?
Oh,
on the
yes,
side?
absolutely.
Okay, and I'm using my other screen, so it looks like I'm looking in the sky, but I'm using my other screen to be able to open these documents. So for the base, you all had parent liaisons, family resource centers, mental health supports, and tutoring. The mental health supports piece is in that funding formula. We can pull it up and look at both documents if we need to in just a minute. For weights, I believe the only thing that you all had on this list that is not in that draft is a weight for high school students. And then direct funding, the tutoring piece is there, rural is there. I'm not sure, I don't remember seeing anything about educator diversity. And would have to go over and look to see if highly mobile was included in the outcomes.
I thought that was one of the must-haves. I'm not sure it goes on this document, but how do we weave that into this document?
It's there. It was in the outcomes row, Dominique.
Was it? Okay.
If you scroll back up.
Yeah, scroll on one because I was reading it right when, there you go. It says
Incentive to increase educator diversity.
So this is the list that you all came up with during meeting 4.
Okay, very good.
And so if there's anything on this list that did not show up in that draft formula, this would be the space to recommend it again. So, you know, things that the group feels very strongly, and I will turn it back over to you, Victor.
Can I just, this is Sam, can I just make a comment about the up at the top in the base, the family resource centers are a vehicle for delivering services. And so I'm wondering if that's what, there are multiple versions of how to do that. And so I'm wondering if what we're really talking about is wraparound or integrated student supports when we're saying family resource centers.
Yeah, well, I think that's a good question, Sam, and I think kind of diving deeper into that, I think where we'll ultimately end up once this framework becomes a policy or a bill. I think how that will be assessed will likely be through defining which how those students fit into this category. So do they fall under an economically disadvantaged column, right? Based on that definition. And then I think the other thing we need to think about is, should we continue to have that in the base, or should that be something that should be a weight, or even should it be something that is direct funding or programmatic funding? So Mary makes a good point. They might want to separate the unique learning needs into ELL and students with disabilities to ensure groups had their needs met. So Mary, do you mean like separately versus just in one grouping? I think that's what she might mean.
Yeah, sorry, I'm having technical difficulties here. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just mostly have questions about the weighting on some of this stuff. I just, I don't know if everybody else is having that reaction. Like some of the rural, anyway. Questions, sorry. I've had too much caffeine today, I apologize.
We can try to answer your questions if you, and if we can't answer them, we can get answers to the questions. So I'm happy to take them down in the notes.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think it's hard for us to answer that fully without numbers. But I think the fact that we're mentioning that those potentially need to be separated is, again, keeping the students at the center of it, ensuring that the needs are fully met, especially with your ELL students and students with disabilities. And kind of looking at how the weighting will go. I mean, we're looking at heavy for your economically disadvantaged, and then varies heavy, moderate, light. And is it feasible to make everything heavy? I don't know, right? That's something that we'll need to figure out, or I guess those who make the calls on the dollar amounts will need to figure out.
And I will also clarify that students who fall into these weighted categories, they will get weights for each category they fall into. So if they are an ELL student and they are a student with a disability and they are an economically disadvantaged, all of those weights would be applied separately.
So tell me if I'm correct, that, so meaning like if a child qualifies under 2 or 3 different areas, that wouldn't be put together, they would get extra under 2, 3 different areas. So in other words, if they were economically disadvantaged, there would be something given. If on top of that, they were dyslexic, there would be something else given, that kind of thing?
Yes, that's correct.
Yes, as is proposed here, correct.
And if I could, if you think about it, that's probably right, because having one issue does not preclude the need to have extra help with another one. So that probably makes sense.
No, it really does. The two can be mutually exclusive, certainly.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and this kind of brings us into like our next conversation. I think we can keep this one pager up, or I guess 2-pager up. Dominique, could you scroll down to the outcomes based portion? So, a lot of you may have heard, one, in seeing this, but two, just kind of hearing about conversations around this new proposed funding formula. A component for outcomes based, so looking at the performance of schools and student achievement, and rewarding or giving additional dollars to those school districts who show gains in student achievement. And there's kind of a some people feel that's a great idea, some feel it's not so great idea. But would love to open the floor up to hear any thoughts around keeping that component in here. Obviously, as proposed, is there.
I think that's a great idea. And the reason, let me justify why I say I think it's a great idea. What as advocates, we always propose is that the best teachers teach the most needy students. And if we're going to give additional weight for students that need the most, that could then attract some very, very good teachers who might be willing to take on this added. Because if you've ever taught, if you're an advocate at all, you realize that it takes some extra to teach kids that are economically disadvantaged, with special needs, with all of these extra things. So I think adding some possible dollars there would attract some of the really good teachers.
Any other thoughts? Looking at it, I mean, high ACT scores, high SAT scores, schools and districts with high high performance rates on your end of year assessments, that kind of thing. And as we're talking about this, I want to make sure we're continuing to think about what impact could this have on an outcomes based component have on students who are economically disadvantaged and highly mobile. One thing that I think that should probably be considered is maybe we look at what the achievement of those students in those subgroups and the weights that were referenced in the weights we just discussed. What does their achievement look like, right? If we kind of go back to the most recent, I guess, release of our TCAP scores across the state, we saw that the scores were down. Perhaps those school districts, hone in on your ELL students and your economically disadvantaged students, and there's additional dollars for those districts that show growth of those students, right, who might have already been behind, and are still behind.
So I've added in the document here, Victor, if you want that as a recommendation so you've said something both about achievement of subgroups and the growth of subgroups who are typically behind. Do you want both pieces of those considered here?
Yes.
Okay.
Dominic, I think we can dive into now the policy pieces of our conversation, where we look at the terms around poverty and economically disadvantaged.
Victor, I'm sorry. Can I ask a quick question?
Go ahead,
Maybe.
please.
Thank you. Y'all could definitely educate me, but are all schools in Tennessee, the districts, do they have active transition services for students with disabilities? And what I mean is persons with disabilities or students with disabilities under, I think it was IDEA at one time, students had to have transitional or those services that could assist them in going to work once they are graduated.
Great question.
I think most of them do. I think most of them, I think they are required to have some services so that, they make them available. The students don't always take the services and use them, but I think they're all required to do that. I think, I really think the special ed, the legislation and stuff, I think the requirement is that they have, all of them have them.
Okay, thank you.
Something that I neglected to mention, I think Dominique mentioned this a few minutes ago, but the high school weight, that's something I think that we discussed in a previous meeting, but I do not think was reflected in the proposed framework. Is that correct, Dominique? Yeah. Any thoughts around that? Do we, should we continue to push for that? I mean, I think it will be something, nice to have for sure. As we look at, a lot of the preparation and costs that go into preparation for students to matriculate through high school, into post-secondary or, into the workforce or whatever it is. And looks like some of that's reflected in the base around counselors and whatnot. But if we look at college counselors, AP courses, dual enrollment costs, externship costs for those who might decide to go into the workforce, community college, that kind of thing. Any additional thoughts about that, or do we feel good leaving that out?
Do we feel like that all that's covered in the weights that have been proposed thus far, and or do we think that's been covered in the base of the formula and those needs and services? There's no need for an additional weight to cover the high school services. That's already covered.
What does it harm it to include it? Just an event is not covered, Victor.
Well, no, I think it would be great to include that.
And spell it out.
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. But we are a collective here, so I want to make sure everyone feels good about that as well. So.
And what does number 4 charter schools mean? What, tell me how that impacts. When you go back under, roll it back down, please. Down, 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 down. When you're looking at the weights, go down further. Okay.
Is it not scrolling? I mean, it looks like it's showing, but it could be delayed. Are you seeing it now?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Victor, I can help with that if you want to take it first, that's.
Yes, Senator, my understanding is that weight around charter schools is tied to enrollment and facilities for charter facilities as well. And just high level looking at this, I think a charter school weight would make sense considering a good portion of the enrollment of students in charter schools, fall under the criteria: economically disadvantaged, ELL, special needs, unique learning needs. So, and this, I think would make sense if we're really trying to make an impact for our most at-risk students. But I'm, open to obviously hearing everyone's thoughts around that. That's what we're here to discuss.
I will add that there is funding that is already in the budget, every year for charter schools. They have to pay rent to their districts. And so this is continuing to fund what's already being funded, but putting it in the formula. It's not currently in the BEP, but pulling it into this formula. Parents are choosing to enroll their children in charter schools. They are in Tennessee, and so, they deserve funding like other public school students, is the thought behind that.
Yeah, I was just trying to figure out how it played into being a part of the weight.
So would the weight here, as we're reading it, take away in any way what's already in the budget that requires them to pay rent to their local school district, or would this be in addition to what's already in there? Because you said it's not in the BEP now, but we want to put it in there. What does that do to what's already out there, or do you know?
I don't know exactly. I do know that, it is already funded. It's just outside of the current BEP funding. So it's just pulling that amount in.
So if it's pulling in that same amount, I guess my question, that doesn't go directly to, rent doesn't go directly to giving weight to a kid in a charter school. I guess the way I'm looking at it, maybe I'm not looking at it.
Well, there may be more, like with many of these other areas, there may be more flexibility once that's in a district's hands. I just know that that was the intent behind pulling this in. there might be flexibility in how it's used, and I don't know about the amount.
And if it's not, what impact will it have if it's not included as a weight? How does it change the dynamics of what we're trying to accomplish here?
I don't know.
I think we kind of see what you have now, where, as Dominique said, they will continue to pay their rent, but there's not, there would not be additional dollars for those students in those schools in particular.
Mm-hmm.
So, but that is a good question, Senator, about whether or not those dollars, if there's a way for economically disadvantaged with that, those dollars go to support students in the public charter schools as well as they would in a traditional public school.
So the way this is written, that funding for rent and whatnot would continue, but if a child qualifies under one or more other weights, they would get that. Like my example earlier, if they were economically disadvantaged, they would get those dollars. If they were dyslexic, or they would get those, that kind of thing on top of.
Got it. Thank you, Commissioner.
Oh, don't thank me, I'm asking.
No, that appears to be right, but we can definitely get that question answered. All right, well, Dominic, I think now is a good time for us to hop over to that list of policies, fairly lengthy, and this will likely dip into our next meeting as well. Dominic, could you provide a little background and context around this portion of the meeting and the importance of defining a lot of these terms?
Yes. So this document has some policy considerations that subcommittees will be providing feedback on. Some of this is just asking subcommittees to provide feedback on definitions, and then some, gets a little bit more into answering some questions. When you see question here, I think most of these questions have come from the steering committee, and they are wanting the subcommittees to provide policy considerations around these areas. The first couple fall directly in line with this subcommittee. You all are the economically disadvantaged and highly mobile group. And so one of the first things that we're asked to do here is to define what we think economically disadvantaged should mean for Tennessee. So previously, this was done by free and reduced lunch applications. Many of you will remember that. Then the state a few years ago moved away from that and went to what's called direct certification under, community eligibility programs, things like where families receive SNAP, TANF, if they have they're foster children, homeless, those types of things. Those students who are direct cert or directly certified under one of those programs are how they calculate that ED, economically disadvantaged percentage now. Okay, so this is just an opportunity for your committee to begin giving some information and thoughts around what you think that it should be. And then the second one is definition of concentration of poverty. So that currently looking at that like Title I schools, students in Title I schools, if they are in that school that is considered a Title I school, all students in that school would be considered that concentration of poverty. So that pulls in some students that might not necessarily be a direct certification student. But those are two things that you will want to spend some time having a discussion around of how should we define these two things in Tennessee.
Thank you, Dominique. I think that's a great place to start. Defining economically disadvantaged and what that means. And I think it makes sense for us to view this from, there's all sorts of definitions, right? There's federal definitions and all sorts of codified language and everything. I think it makes sense for us to think about what makes most sense for Tennesseans and for Tennessee, our students in Tennessee. Are there any initial thoughts around this definition? Is it fine as is? Could it be refined, more specific, more targeted to the needs of our students? Think about the students in your communities who fall under would fall under this definition. Is this enough, or could it be expanded to really be inclusive of ensuring that the needs are met of these students?
What would the verbiage sound like if you expanded it? What are your thoughts?
That's a great question, Senator. And I think that's something that we all need to figure out. Dominique, could you is there a definition per se for direct certification?
Give me just a second and I'll find it. I found it the other day. So here's the national. I didn't have the definition though.
And I don't have the the silver bullet answer on what that verbiage should look like, but I will say, however it's defined, ultimately, it would need to be easy to understand. I think, a year from now, after this legislation, starting to be implemented, we look back and we can clearly say, like, this is what it means to be economically disadvantaged and to have X dollars, that kind of thing. So at the very least, it needs to be a very simple definition, I would say, and not something that's super wonky with a bunch of terms that are hard to understand. Or does direct certification, does that encapsulate it all? Just probably help if we kind of knew what that meant, but
I like Mary's suggestion in the chat about including TenCare to more fully capture students. So just wanted to point that out. I would agree with that. Expanding it to include those students would be, I think, a good thing.
Would that be in addition to, or would be narrowing the path for others to be considered as disadvantaged children if they don't receive TenCare?
In addition to.
In addition to, yes,
Yeah.
what I meant was use the direct certification, the free and reduced lunch, and TenCare, and then we're gonna capture the group we want to, I think.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not laborious to do those two. They're already doing one of them.
Mm-hmm.
So Tennessee, currently students classified by direct certification are homeless, migrant, runaway are also added in that, in addition to receiving student nutrition, SNAP funds, TANF funds. And so So your
it looks like it
recommendation here
includes
is to expand
Foster and Head Start
Foster,
as well.
yes.
Yeah.
Foster, yeah.
Can we specifically spell that out rather than using the words certification? Can we say what it is? Did that make sense what I was asking?
In our recommendations, is that what you're saying, to spell out?
Yeah, to say specifically what they are.
It'd be good for legislators, particularly to know what's in there. I think DOE knows what's in there, but I don't think the public and folks looking at it necessarily know what it is. So, you know, even just saying we acknowledge that you want this, we just want to put it in writing that this is what it includes, and please add care.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm with you.
To use that verbiage that Dominique just read is what I'm asking.
Yes.
So I have put in the feedback here to put in writing all of the pieces that are included in direct certification, and then expand it to include students who receive TNCare. Accurate? Or families.
That makes me very happy.
Or put in writing the definition of certification.
Okay.
Great. Yeah, I think that's pretty clear and understandable for everyone. All right, well, let's hop to the next one. Dominique, can you put that slide back up? Or that page up.
Now
So
I'm
the next
typing
one,
on I'm typing on a separate document than where I'm sharing my screen. So I am capturing it. It's just not on that one.
yeah, no worries. All right, so the next one is definition of concentration of poverty. So currently we have it as attending a Title I school. And I think we may have discussed this in a little bit in our last meeting, but there were talks about concentration of poverty versus poverty, and you know, really honing in on what that means. So, you know, attending a Title I school, I don't know how the entire code spells out, you know, what Title I means. However, I think since this is a public school funding formula, I think a good definition should for sure include, you know, Title I school, a reference to a school, and a reference to a part of the code that talks about poverty. But we'll love to hear any other thoughts around this piece. Should we expand it some, similar to how we did with the first definition, or do we feel that this pretty much encapsulates what we want to get out of it and how it defines, you know, low-income students and their needs?
So that's currently being defined as a Title I school.
That's how it's currently being looked at as feedback has come in. That's the current recommendation, but they're looking for additional feedback.
And I really think there needs to be something additional, just like we sort of did the previous one, because you know, everyone that attends a Title I school might not be in concentrated poverty. So, you know, I think it, you know, we hooked on to the previous one, you know, receive TNCare and maybe SNAP and some other things. I'm not sure what exactly needs to go on there, but I do believe we need to better define it. rather than just a Title I school.
Gloria, I think that's really smart. I wonder if we couldn't do a sliding scale weight based on, concentration of kids from low income backgrounds, just like we did on the previous one.
Yes, I would like to see that.
Because you're right, because some Title I schools have much more poverty than others. I'm with you. Smart idea, Gloria.
All right. Great point there. Dominic,
Not
let's
sure I
start with
got, yeah, I was having a hard time hearing, so I just want to make sure that I have the recommendation. So I've got that we need to better define to include other things. I heard sliding scale, but I could not hear after that.
Would y'all like to jump back in and okay. Mary just typed in a sliding scale based on number of low income kids.
Would you have a way that you wanted to exactly define the low income? Would you go back up to the ED definition, or do you have something else different in mind here?
I think that same ED definition, the certification in 10 care.
Agreed. For
I think that's
consistency.
true.
Keep it
I
consistent.
think that's true.
All right. Well, Dominique, we have about 9 minutes left, and I think this is a good pausing point with these two policy recs. Should probably do, quickly review what we put down as those policy recommendations. My understanding is that the department is going to look at this stuff in real time and continue to take in this feedback. So, kick it over to you, Dominique.
Okay, so I have to expand the definition of economically disadvantaged to include families who receive TennCare, and then put in writing the definition and all of the pieces that are included for direct certification. And then for concentration of poverty, need to better define and include other things, a slide based on the number of low income students using the same ED definition as above of direct certification and TennCare. Did I miss anything there? And then I wanted to go up to make sure that we've added all of the recommendations that we want to add on the base weights direct funding. I don't have anything.
So I would say yes, that encapsulates our definitions for the policies. So okay. You give me an affirming yes there.
Thank you. So up with the other part, I added high school grade band to the weights. We're recommending that to be considered since it's not part of the draft. And for outcomes, I have achievement and growth of subgroups who are typically behind. Did I miss anything there?
So for the second part, that's tied to the outcomes based in the event that outcomes based is part of the final proposal. Outcomes should look at risk students and the growth of those students.
Anything else in those categories that we want to add? Is anybody else worried about outcomes performance? I just worried that the schools that don't have resources and programming are just going to get penalized there. The outcome space really makes me nervous. I don't know how others are feeling about it, but I just think it's going to take money away from some of our most challenged schools.
Yeah, that's widening the achievement gap. That's a great point. Yeah, and I think if the focus remains on the at-risk students, even the schools that are typically high performing. Imagine there are some at-risk students who attend those. The focus is there, then perhaps this is a way to get an outcomes-based component in there while keeping the focus on those students.
Yeah, Victor, I think that we're going to have to figure out maybe not for this committee, but just overall a balance, because in the same vein, we some of the reasons that the students are at risk at those schools are because of socioeconomic detriments and poverty. And so needless to say, if I'm hungry or I'm from an abusive background, I'm not going to show up. I'm less likely to show up at school prepared to learn. So I think that we're going to have to find a balance with that. And there may be more, it might be more community services in those areas that you have at-risk schools, that should be like a defining thing, that if it's an at-risk school, or if the school is in a high area that meets the definition, the state definition of a poverty-based program or things, maybe that would be the catapult to make sure that community services are more stronger in those areas. Just a thought.
I applaud that. I totally agree with that. As we talked about wraparound services and how critical they were, and as we talked about ensuring that parent liaison had a great weight, I think that has to happen. If that does not happen, then we will have a different formula, but coming out with the same results. And after all of this work, we definitely don't. We want to come out, we have different outcomes.
Absolutely. Well, I think that we'll put a pause for there. We definitely have some work to continue doing in our next meeting. And speaking of, our next meeting will be Wednesday, January 26th. And then the State of the State will be January 31st. And I think we can look towards that date to get more clarity around what this proposal will look like, and potentially even some dollar amounts. But thank you all again for your work here. We accomplished a lot today, and there is nothing else remaining for the order. We stand adjourned. Y'all have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you for your
Rob.
leadership. Are we okay with the
Thank you.
timeline, Dominique? Do you know?
I'm sorry.
Are we okay within our timeline in terms of getting our work done? Because when you read it
Yes, we're
in the media, it sounds like